is usually what triggers those reactions. So you look at it, you look at why you feel that way, you decide how you would do it differently next, because this is how you grow. You go, you know what, next time I am going to speak up and say, you know, don't change my seat without my permission, or whatever it is that upset you. And then forgive yourself for having not spoken up, because again, you would have if you were ready. A beautiful thing is that we are never the negative things we say about ourselves. Like if you go, oh, I'm just being lazy, you're never actually being lazy. And here's why. If this thing that you were going to do spoke to you, resonated with you, triggered your bliss, you would be up and doing it. It's not. Maybe you worked all day and you've been chasing the kids around. Okay, laying on the couch for a bit to rest is not being lazy. It is doing what you need to do. We always do the absolute best we can in any particular situation. And then we beat ourselves up and tell us why it wasn't the best we could do. But it always is, because none of us would ever deliberately fall short. Why would we? So any thoughts of lazy or stupid or whatever you're beating yourself up with, they're not true. They're not even close to true. Because every person, and yes, this includes the people that we may be upset with for political and other reasons, is doing the best they can. A good thing for that goes back to my youngest two strands. I had a lot of issue with the political forces that were pushing against, like they couldn't use bathroom, like all these things that were going to make my child's life really difficult. And even mine, because there's some states that were, you know, taking parents to jail for hormone therapy and things. And so I had a lot of mama bear anger, a lot of fear, until I realized they were doing the best they can. Because from their perception, they're actually helping children. They feel they're saving them. It doesn't mean I agree with them, and it doesn't mean I won't protect my child, and I won't stay true to boundaries that keep my child safe. But I cannot transmute the world from a fearful one that's going to attack them into a world that is going to embrace them because it believes in diversity. If I'm hating those people, Martin Luther King used to talk about it all the time. You can't make them your enemies. You have to have compassion for those you are calling your enemies. Because if you are hating back, if you are putting anger back into it, it will never get resolved. And I know that's easier said than done. Because if someone says something ignorant about my child, you know, but I will try to approach it and, as a boundary, correct their perception in a loving and gentle way. I'm sorry that you feel that way. But I want you to know how absolutely wonderful my child is and how much happier they are embracing being who they feel they are inside. Now, some people won't listen to that. And you know what? That's okay. But it took a lot to be okay with that. So I'm going to open the floor up to questions, if anybody has any. Oh, yes? Oh, you know what? Let me bring this over because I can't hear you with the background noise.
I heard a lot about anger towards other people. I'm my darkest shadow. So, if you could speak to...
I sure can. This was kind of where I went into the beating yourself up part, because it is the central of all of it. I am much worse to myself than I am to the world around me. Again, the autoimmunes were a manifestation of that. All diseases, all illnesses root in a shadow. And once you can let that shadow go, it changes everything. But I realized I was so much quicker to forgive everybody else than myself. The example of being when I was in 4th grade. You know, I blamed a 4th grade me. I beat myself up the whole way. You look at those the same exact way. Now, you can't use the mirror trick when it's you. But you can still look at it and go, what is the shadow connected to this emotion? And you look and you go, okay, I am feeling this. And this is more important when you have these things where you self-flagellate. you're going to take a lot more forgiving yourself every step of the way. You know, you look back at your life and say, you know what? I would have done that differently. How would I have done that differently? And then forgive you back then. And what I mean by that is when you go back to those points in your life where you're going, I was such an idiot, I can't believe I, went somewhere alone with that guy and he spiked my drink. I was an idiot. Well, no, you weren't an idiot, or you wouldn't have done it because you would have known what was going to happen, but how could you? So the new you who knows that because they know what happened is putting a blame that is unfair on yourself. And again, I don't like the word fair, but this is internal. You're blaming yourself for not having omnipotence. And until we get to the end, there's not going to be omnipotence. And so forgive that. And then look at you will notice, and I love this part, you release positivity as you release the shadows. What happens is you'll start to see your strengths instead of the things that you're calling yourself that are negative. It is all light. Something that I realized, the James Webb Telescope pictures that have just come out, and there's so much more stars and brightness. The thing is that's just because our perspective got bigger. So if you go even further out and further out that we can see, eventually it is all light. So our shadows are what we perceive because our perspective is just too narrow being an incarnation. And I'm not saying I got it. I've been doing a lot of work through the shadow work, but I have a long way to go, as evidenced by just a week ago having a big piece of shadow work that came out. And you know what? It's not over as long as you're an incarnation. Because if you had cleared all your shadows, you would be all light and you would no longer be physical. And so that's part of why to work towards it. Not that I'm not loving it here, but eventually I will get there and see the whole world change. If people understand New Earth, we will shift into New Earth and it will be beautiful. Is there any other questions? Yes.
Probably a little bit different question, but you kind of alluded to
Yes. Sure. Sure. I'll touch where I can. Yeah. Okay, so the question was involving ways of signs you're an empath as well as working with it, I'm assuming? Sure. I fully believe, actually, if anyone thinks they're an empath, they are. Because it is an intuition. It is something that you feel. You know when their emotions are off kilter. Now, there's many stages of empath. An unhealed empath is the term I use for where most of us are for most of our life until we've learned to work with it. And as an unhealed empath is where codependency tendencies will come in. That's a totally different class that I will be doing, actually, I believe, in Cincinnati, but I can touch on it. And what that is because when you're an empath, you hate feeling other people's upset. And so you do everything to avoid making that happen. But in the process, you lose your own identity because you won't stand up for your own boundaries, because your boundaries will then trigger them being more upset. And that is more aberrant to you than just giving up whatever it is you had wanted. But then you get resentment. You end up angry. Why am I always the one to sacrifice? And that's why codependency is the trap of being an unhealed empath. The secret to becoming a healed empath is boundaries. Learn to speak your truth. Learn to tell people how you feel, even if they may react negatively. Guess what? They will. Especially the people who benefited from you not having any boundaries. Now, this is an unpopular thing, but I have found it at least in my experience to be true, narcissists are empathetic. They are empaths that got so twisted at some point from traumas, etc., that they use their ability to feel and read people for their own self-validation. They want everyone to validate them because they're so wounded. Narcissists can be healed too, but it all has to do with your empathy. And what I would say to work on your empathy is start testing yourself. When you're waiting for a bank of elevators and you hit the button, feel which one's going to show up first. As those little things build, you gain confidence in your own abilities. Now, all of us have the abilities, it's just whether or not we're listening. But as you start to prove to yourself that you can trust it, the most amazing things open up for you. I mean, you really learn which way to go. I had a friend the other day that we were visiting. I shouldn't say the other day, but, at this point, everything feels like the other day. And she said something to my partner, and he was explaining how there was a period of time where we were learning to trust my intuition. And I would say, we did this, and he'd go, I don't think that's a good idea, because very smart, very logic-brained. I mean, he knew what made sense on paper. And all the things he was picking were not working out. And so he learned, you know what, maybe I'll trust it. What's beautiful is he's learned to trust his own intuition in the process. And now, he's been honing his own through that process, seeing what feels right and then watching it be the one he thought was right. Well, what my friend said is, well, yeah, but what happens when you're wrong? And I went, but I'm not. And I knew that sounded incredibly egotistical, but I didn't even mean it that way. When you learn to trust that intuition and it keeps proving itself to you, you really do know. And it, again, is very self-affirming, which then helps you let go of that negative self-flagellation that brings you down. Learn to embrace the wonderful gifts that are uniquely yours. Because we all have all of these superhero abilities as you start to awaken and you see the craziest things happen where you're like, okay, what are the chances? When you find out that 6 times a day you're going, oh my God, what are the chances? Maybe life is just full of miracles and we weren't looking at them. I like to use the orange car analogy. The orange car analogy is actually what I'm finding out I'll end with because I just got the little thing for it. You notice what you look for. Had a friend mention an orange car that her husband had, and we're like, I don't remember seeing orange cars. And she's like, you wouldn't believe how many you see once you have one. My partner's like, I don't think I've seen an orange car in years, other than a work truck. Would you know, we see 5 to 10 of them a day, at least. And it's because we are looking for it. So what I'll end with is when you're looking for the orange car, consider the orange car good. You will see good. If you're looking at the negative, if you're afraid, you will see the things to be afraid of. So don't. Look for the things to be excited about, and it'll all change. If anyone has any other questions, since I'm getting wrapped up, I'm at booth 111, Laughing Goddess 888, and I would gladly speak to you there.